has a new focus: take the capital city. American officials reportedly concerned Kyiv could fall this weekend. Through our reporters, we know of explosions and small arms fire throughout the city already. Ukrainian President Zelensky is pleading for NATO and allies to step in, telling a European leaders group on a conference call today, "This quote-unquote might be the last time you see me alive." Zelensky reported that on day one, 137 Ukrainian troops and civilians were killed, more than 300 people wounded. Those are not real-time numbers. We will update as we can, but it is war. Senator Marco Rubio today with this.
I don't know if you've watched the images in the last 48 hours, okay? You have 70-something-year-old men, elderly women, younger children taking up arms, prepared to sacrifice everything. It reminds you how valuable freedom and liberty is. These are people that are basically saying, we refuse to be Putin's slaves, we refuse to live under tyranny, and we're prepared to give our life and die for it.
Republican Senator Tom Cotton is in focus this hour. We begin in Kyiv with Trey Yingst reporting live. Trey.
Harris, good morning. Ukrainian officials say Russian forces have breached the city limits of Kyiv and are currently in the northern part of the Ukrainian capital as we speak. Throughout the day, we've heard small arms fire and air raid sirens going off here in Kyiv, and really a population that is bracing for the worst. I want to bring up a map here and show you this area that we are talking about. You see that red line that surrounds the city limits of Kyiv. You see the presidential residence and the government house in the northern part of this city. We are downtown right now, and this is an area of land that is really vulnerable if there is an invasion into the center part of the city. And it's part of the reason that you saw the interior minister offering to give thousands of weapons to civilians who say they will pick up arms and fight for the freedom of their country, and specifically this city. We were in the streets of Kyiv today, talking with civilians and visiting those who are currently sleeping in the metro system here, afraid of a Russian air campaign. Take a look. The city of Kyiv is on edge at this hour. Russian forces are advancing on the Ukrainian capital, and we've seen armed police officers outside of government buildings trying to prepare for what could be a bloody urban battle. Underground in the Kyiv metro, Ukrainian civilians are waiting out the Russian air campaign currently targeting this city. Troops are within just a few miles of the city center, and there's a real fear that civilians will run out of places to hide.
We have nowhere to go, so we came here, to the underground. It's safer here.
The Ukrainian people need help at this hour. They don't have a month to wait to see if sanctions will affect the behavior of Russian President Putin. There are people dying in the streets of this country today. And if there aren't heavier sanctions imposed on the Russians, and if this country doesn't receive more defensive weapons, it will completely fall into the hands of Russian President Putin, and it will be occupied by Russian forces. Harris.
Trey, I have a question about where people are, though, just in terms of where they're trying to hide. I know some are trying to stay in the city because the men have been told, ages 18 to 60 by their president, please stay and fight. But I am curious, if you're in a subway system, is that a safe place to be? I mean, there are a whole lot of things that people can do from above, and I don't want to get too technical here, but that is a cause for concern when you see those pictures of all those people in one location.
Look, a lot of these civilians want to leave, but they don't have the means or resources to do so. Those who can and have cars have made their way to the western part of this country, to cities like Lviv and even onto the Polish border. But the ones who are staying in the city, they have heard the air raid sirens through the night. It pierces the air here in the Ukrainian capital, and they have seen the videos and the images of what the Russian weapons can do to a house, can do to a person, and they're afraid. And they feel the safest place for them to be is underground. So many are in bomb shelters that have opened up across the city of Kyiv, and those who can't make it to those shelters, as we saw today, are going underground to the metro system.
All right. Trey Yingst, we'll come back to you this hour as the news warrants. Great reporting as always. Thank you. Well, as Putin's bloody war puts countless lives at risk, President Biden met again with NATO leaders earlier today to talk about the path forward in Ukraine. Yesterday, you know, Biden announced a new round of sanctions on Russia, but reporters quickly questioned why he wasn't going directly after Vladimir Putin. They pressured Biden about why he hasn't yet pushed to ban Putin from the SWIFT international banking system.
you didn't mention SWIFT in your sanctions that you announced. Is there a reason why the U.S. Isn't doing that?
It is always an option, but right now that's not the position that the rest of Europe wishes to take.
Given the full-scale invasion, given that you're not pursuing disconnecting Russia from what's called SWIFT, the international banking system, or other sanctions at your disposal, respectfully, sir, what more are you waiting for?
The sanctions we oppose exceed anything that's ever been done. Let's have a conversation in another month or so to see if they're working.
Sanctions clearly have not been enough to deter Vladimir Putin to this point. What is going to stop him?
No one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening.
That last comment there got a lot of backlash. And some critics are pointing out it flies in the face of what many of his administration officials have been saying in recent days.
The president believes that sanctions are intended to deter.
The purpose of the sanctions has always been and continues to be deterrence.
The purpose of that is to do everything we can to deter, to prevent a war, to deter the aggression. And we don't want to pull the trigger until we have to, because we lose the deterrent effect.
A lot to unpack now with Republican Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, member of the Senate Armed Services, Intelligence, and Judiciary Committees. Senator Cotton, it's day 2. What about the metric has changed in terms of what we can do, what we should do, what Biden appears to be ready to do now that war is on, Putin's war?
Joe Biden and NATO leaders need to quit pussyfooting around. You've got moms and dads in Ukraine who are making Molotov cocktails to protect their homes and to protect their kids from Russian soldiers. And Joe Biden and NATO leaders are patting themselves on the back for how many Zoom calls they're having Harris. Those sanctions that we announced yesterday were wholly inadequate, not even a half measure. If you want to put real consequences on Vladimir Putin, you want to make him think twice, we need to sanction his oil and gas exports. I know that Russia has got a lot of leverage over European countries. Well, it's time for those European countries to recognize the mistakes they've made. They can seek help from the United States. We can export liquefied natural gas to them. Our partners in places like Australia and Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar can do the same. And we have to start improving our own oil and gas production here at home. Joe Biden needs to completely reverse his energy policy. President Biden needs to reverse his ban on drilling on federal lands. He needs to start certifying pipelines again so we can get oil and gas flowing again in America. These are the kind of steps that we need to take that are full measures, that recognize the full gravity of this moment, as opposed to the half measures that we've heard this week from President Biden and NATO.
Look, Europe isn't the only one who's beholden to Putin for crude oil, by the way. I mean, we're buying 595,000 gallons a day, Senator. Russia is our 3rd largest supplier behind Canada and Mexico. I have a call out right now to the Department of Energy. Did we buy those 595,000 barrels today? That's what I want to know. And to further your point, our own Peter Doocy asked the president how Putin's war against Ukraine would affect Americans here at home. Let's watch together. All right, we are waiting for them.
Economically painful is it going to get for people in this country?
First of all, there's no doubt that when a major nuclear power attacks and invades another country, that the world is going to respond, and markets can respond all over the world. So there's no doubt about that, number one. Number two, the notion that this is going to last for a long time is highly unlikely as long as we continue to stay resolved in imposing the sanctions we're going to impose on Russia, period.
A little bit more here. Americans are definitely feeling the pain as stock market volatility is hitting their retirement 401k plans. Today, the national average gas price is at $3.57. That's up $1 from last year about. But that's just the average. Some places are already at $5 and more per gallon. A new Fox News poll shows 72% of voters say gas prices are hurting their families. 63% say President Biden is somewhat or very responsible for all of this. The president's sanctions did not target Russia's energy sector. You just heard Senator Cotton saying all about this. And I mentioned the 595,000 barrels of oil a day. But, Senator, you're right about Keystone, because it would have given us 830,000 barrels of crude a day. Critics say we need to get our energy independence back immediately. Let's go straight to the senator here.
It is time to allow the good, strong American worker to go out there and start drilling for oil. Show America, show the world the strength of this nation. Put America back to work. Open up American energy. Joe Biden gave that away. It's time to take it back. And if you want to send a message to Vladimir Putin, here's a message to send him. We're going to be the ones who supply the oil and gas to the world. We're going to shut down your energy sector.
So, Senator, he's hearing this all over the place, President Biden. Will he do it?
Well, I hope so, Harris. You know, he reversed his waiver of sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline earlier this week, tacitly admitting that mistake. His reckless energy policy has been a grave mistake. We would have much freer hand to sanction Russia if gas was still at $2 a gallon, not $3.50 a gallon. We can still impose those sanctions if we will reverse his reckless energy policies, if we'll start drilling on federal lands again, start permitting and putting out new leases immediately, stop discouraging banks and other financial institutions to lend to oil and gas companies, as Joe Biden wants the Federal Reserve to do. These are completely reckless policies that don't just drive up the costs for American families, but they put us at grave risk around the world, as we are seeing in Europe today.
Senator Cotton, is there something that we don't know about that would keep the President of the United States from taking more immediate action? 30 days with what you called less than half measures yesterday. Why the wait? What's holding him back? And I know there are 30 members of NATO now, and it's tough to get consensus, but don't we have what we used to have? Don't we have that swagger when we walk into a room and say, guys, let's get it together?
Well, first, I think the president misjudged Vladimir Putin. He thought if he had enough phone calls with him and had enough meetings with European leaders, somehow Vladimir Putin would stand down. It's been clear to me for months he planned to go for the jugular in Ukraine. Second, President Biden is deeply beholden to the far left of his party, who are in the grips of a diluted ideology that we have to stop all fossil fuel production in America. And third, he's handed the veto pen on sanctions to Russia. It's not just oil and gas sanctions. It's removing them from the international payment system known as SWIFT as well. He admitted as much yesterday that Europe didn't want to do it. Well, we put our foot down with Iran in that payment system during the Trump era, even though our European allies didn't want to do that either. We have the power to take these steps. Joe Biden refuses to do so.
Real quickly, I want to lean on your experience as a leader in the military. And I made a comment moments ago, Senator Cotton, that I'm worried about the people, particularly not the bomb shelters so much, but particularly those in the subway system who are hiding out. There are grates above. There's a lot that you can drop into those subway systems. I'll be more specific now. I'm worried about what they're going to do with the people in the center of Kyiv now. You strategize militarily. What do they do?
Well, sadly, Harris, that may be one of their best choices, even though there are those grates and other air vents, even though you could have a collapse of an entry or an exit if a missile is errant and hits those places. But it may be even more dangerous to stay in their homes or stay in their apartment buildings. This is the kind of choices that Ukrainians now face because we failed to deter Vladimir Putin. But I applaud all those Ukrainians who are answering the call to arms, who are getting firearms, who are making Molotov cocktails. They're responding in the spirit of Churchill, who said if Germany had invaded Great Britain, you can always take one with you. And I hope a lot of them take a lot more than just one with them.
Yeah. Senator Cotton, thank you for getting us started this hour of the Faulkner Focus in Focus. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Dramatic new video now coming into Fox News, and as this happens, we'll continue to show you this hour because it's coming in. Thousands of people at a train station in Kyiv today were trying to get out of the violence, and it's intensifying. Watch this. You hear the small arms fire there. You see the gun in the center of your screen. It's unbelievable, more people than the trains can hold. And at that very same train station, here's the reception Ukrainian troops received. They're grateful. They know their future is in their hands. Those plane platforms are just gut-wrenching. We will continue to bring you new images and all the news. Objectives are behind in their day one objectives, I should say, in this brutal war against the sovereign democracy of Ukraine. Yeah, they're meeting that resistance. They're feeling that push as everybody fights for their lives in their country there. With Russian troops breaching Ukraine's capital, though, today, senior U.S. defense officials are stressing full U.S. support of NATO in the face of Moscow's aggression. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin yesterday deployed an additional 7,000 U.S. troops to Germany. Those troops are set to bolster NATO countries in Eastern Europe, not to fight in Ukraine itself. This is Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell calls on President Biden to crank up the sanctions on the Kremlin. You know, don't wait 30 days.
What additionally could we do over and above ratcheting up the sanctions as far as possible? Assuming there's an insurgency in Ukraine that's willing to fight, we need to give them the tools to fight with. We need to do everything we can to make this Russian incursion painful on the Russians who are engaged in it. I'm hopeful that's the path the president will take.
Jennifer Griffin is live for us at the Pentagon. Jen, you know, I was just reporting from Lucas Tomlinson what they're doing on a beach, the Russian Marines. And I want to hear what you can tell us, too, about any of the methodology that they're using, their military, the Russians as they come in, if you can tell us.
Well, it's interesting, Harris. I just came out of a briefing here at the Pentagon with a senior U.S. defense official. There are indications, as Lucas is reporting, of an amphibious assault underway to the west of Mariupol. Thousands of naval infantry, we're told, are moving ashore near Mariupol on the Sea of Azov. According to this senior U.S. defense official, the Russians have lost a little bit of their momentum in these first 2 days. No population centers have been taken so far. Russia has yet to achieve air superiority, according to this official. Ukraine's air and missile defense capability is still working, though degraded. Ukrainian warplanes are still operational, we're told. In general, in the first 2 days, according to this official, in general, we assess the Russian forces are encountering greater resistance than they expected. Ukraine's command and control, as I mentioned, is still intact. Russian forces are moving on the same 3 lines of axes as we reported yesterday. One towards Kyiv, the capital. This U.S. defense official who has seen the latest intelligence tells us this is slower than the Russians anticipated, meeting more resistance along those roads. They are on those roads to Kyiv and not moving as fast as they hope. Kharkiv, that second largest city in Ukraine, is still contested, we're told. Fighting is going on now. There are no additional airborne drops that have occurred overnight. Biggest change from yesterday, Harris, is those forces approaching Kherson in the south appear to be splitting off and moving north and northeast. There is fighting at a water plant, a dam upriver from Kherson. The hydroelectric power plant controls power to Crimea and South Ukraine and appears to be contested right now based on this briefing I just had. Russia has carried out cyber attacks, we're told, on the power plant. There are indications of some Russian troops present at the plant. As of 10:38 Eastern this morning, more than 200 ballistic and cruise missiles have been fired into Ukraine. Cyber attacks have now spread to Ukrainian media websites and are assumed to be coming from Russia. According to this senior U.S. defense official, we assess that about 1/3, this is according to this official, we assess about 1/3 of Russia's combat troops amassed for the invasion have been committed so far to Ukraine. The situation could change rapidly, we're told, but this is the snapshot as of now. The U.S. is now watching whether Russia is going to weaponize those refugees going into Poland, citing Belarus as a past experience, Harris.
What you just said, and I know you're citing that one official, but 1/3 of Russia's combat troops to be engaged or deployed to Ukraine, that is a huge number. And I guess we've always known it was between 150 and 200,000, somewhere in there, because they've been massing. But when you hear the percentage, it is jarring, Jennifer. Just one last question, and I've got Will Kane with me, so I'm going to kind of pull from his notebook from moments ago when we were talking. What is a tipping point right now where it would take NATO to get involved? So you've got neighboring countries that are part of NATO, Ukraine is not. Is there any word of that?
Harris, I can tell you with certainty, NATO will not get involved in fighting on the ground in Ukraine. That being said, we do know from leaked conversations from the Hill last night that Defense Secretary Austin has assured lawmakers that the U.S. will provide defensive weapons, possible training, virtual training to the Ukraine resistance. Right now, it is very difficult logistically to do so.
Yes.
We know from Ukraine's foreign minister that he got assurances from the Pentagon when he was here for more additional weaponry. But what they have to be careful of right now, and what the Pentagon is cognizant of and NATO is cognizant of, they do not want to be drawn into a direct war with Russia. These are nuclear powers that you're talking about. This is not the Taliban. But what would be a tipping point? A tipping point would be if Putin somehow moved into an Article 5 country like Lithuania, Poland. That's why the U.S. sent, that's the Baltics, Romania. That is why the Pentagon announced they were sending F-35 fighter jets to that region. 6 have just arrived. They've added an additional 12,000 troops. 7,000 were indicated yesterday in Biden's speech. And the NATO response force is considering mobilizing 40,000 troops to rotate through those Baltic states to send the signal to Putin not to dare go past what he's already doing. The Ukrainian resistance is strong. It's stronger than expected. And frankly, they are fighting nobly right now. They're outgunned. As we said, only a third of Russia's forces have moved into Ukraine, but they're moving slower than expected, and they're having a harder time gaining air superiority. That's why you haven't seen any sort of shock and awe, Harris.
Jennifer Griffin, thank you so much. And you know what? I'm going to go right from what you were talking about with those Article 5 countries right to Bill Himmer. He's on the mezzanine right now with our touchscreen on the Faulkner Focus. So Bill, to that tipping point, and you and I talked a little bit about it yesterday, too, that tipping point with those countries. Go into that, if you will, and then we'll learn more about where exactly the Russian military.
Just listening to Jennifer talk, great information, by the way. I mean, fantastic to learn what she's getting on the ground here. She's describing essentially a lot of what's happening in the southern part of the country. She mentioned the town of Mariupol. That's about right here along the Sea of Azov. She mentioned the town of Kherson is over here, Kherson, excuse me, just east of Odessa. The Ukrainians spell Odessa with one S. The Russians spell it with two. Many people have written in to ask about that. That's the reason why we've got it spelled that way. So the activity she describes here is down around the Crimea area, which we know was taken. It was already invaded 8 years ago by the Russians in 2014. Harris, I would say, here's your capital city of Kyiv. You think about all these red marks here throughout the entire map here on the north, northeast, the east, and the south. When you consider what Jennifer just reported about 1/3 of the Red Army has already entered Ukraine, 66% is still left over. I mean, that's rather daunting, Harris, when you think about how much more firepower can enter that country. And we'll see what happens here, right? I mean, look, the Ukrainian military is better equipped than they were in 2014. They have Stinger missiles. They have Javelin missiles.
Right.
The Stingers go after the aircraft, and the Javelin missiles go after the tanks. Right now, based on some of the reporting, we're only into day 2 now, okay? Only day 2, but right now they seem to be showing some resistance there for the Red Army.
The amphibious attack, though, that we have just learned from both Jennifer Griffin and Lucas Tomlinson is outside the parameters of those things that they might be able to use against them. And so we'll have to see how that works out. I know Secretary Lloyd Austin has said on that leaked audio that Jennifer just mentioned that, maybe we can do some shoring up virtually. I would have to imagine Russia's going to do everything it can to cyber attack that country to stop the communication.
It could. Frankly, I've been surprised by how much
is coming out.
Yeah,
right?
I agree with that. If I could share another map with you, I'll show you another part of the country. This is the capital city of Kyiv. Harris, I think really to all our viewers, you have to keep an eye on whether or not the Ukrainian military can hold on to this city, whether or not the Russian army gets in there and really can exact some revenge against the army and clear people out. If that happens, based on the resistance we're hearing about, eventually, Harris, you could be street by street, building by building, and house by house throughout the capital city. I just want to point this out because this is Obolon here. When we woke up this morning, say about 4 o'clock Eastern time, that's when Steve Harrigan was reporting about the amount of fighting they heard. This is 6 miles roughly from the live location, roughly in the center part of the capital city. And this is the air base. We talked about that together yesterday afternoon. The Kremlin says they've taken the air base, and that's bad news for the Ukrainians because they can fly all kinds of troops and equipment in. And Harris, this is, as the bird flies, only 24 miles from Kyiv, so we're keeping an eye on that. I'll just show you this too as well, just to give you a better idea here. Here's the Belarus border. We know what happened yesterday. The Russians took Chernobyl. They came down here with the way it's described toward Kyiv, to the northwest and to the northeast, and it seems as if that's as far as they've advanced for the moment to this air base here in the neighborhood I just pointed out a moment ago, Harris.
So, Bill, real quickly, Will Cain was on Fox and Friends this morning, and he's standing by because we're going to have another conversation about where we go next, and you're giving us some rich detail about what that looks like. Is there something you'd like to ask about with Bill there? Because things have changed in just the last few hours since you were on the air.
Well, Bill's highlighting, Harris, I think the movement in just a couple of hours. Bill, when we went on the air, as you pointed out this morning, Steve was saying they were, what, 2 to 6 miles outside the city of Kyiv. Whatever's happening amphibiously and whatever's happening in the Ukrainian army, because this seems to be an attempt. This seems to be an attempt to decapitate. That's the word we keep hearing, Bill, right? Decapitate the Ukrainian government, which means take Kyiv, take Zelensky.
Yeah. And if that happens, then you start to wonder, and you ask yourself your question. And we're not there yet, by all means, but just hypothetically speaking, for all these Ukrainians who have picked up arms, do they continue to fight? All indications are they will. Okay.
All indications.
At the moment.
So real quickly, I want to get to this with you, Bill. President Biden also said yesterday that for Putin, Ukraine is actually part of a bigger plan. Let's watch, listen together, and I'll come right back.
He has much larger ambitions in Ukraine. He wants to, in fact, reestablish the former Soviet Union. That's what this is about. And I think that his ambitions are completely contrary to the place where the rest of the world has arrived.
We don't have a lot of time left with Bill Hemmer. He's got a lot to do today, but what would that look like?
He's got a point. And, you know, that Putin's worst day in his life was 1989 when he left East Berlin and went back to Moscow and looked at the former USSR and what it became. That argument goes to the following issue. If he's successful here in Ukraine, this is the new border of Europe, okay, Harris? This is the new border between Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Germany, Romania, on down. Because Ukraine would then be in the Russian fold. Belarus is not going anywhere. They're brothers in arms between Moscow and Minsk. And you would have an eastern border with Putin's Russian military, and you'd have a western border with the U.S. and NATO. And this would be people describe the new Europe, this would be the new Europe as of 2022.
Bill Hemmer, thank you very much. We'll push on to this. Putin's war on Ukraine comes with President Biden set to deliver his first State of the Union address on Tuesday. And new Fox polling shows 56% of voters feel he has not been tough enough on Russia. He'll be speaking to the public that already has a dim view of the country's direction. A recent Fox Business poll finds more than 2 out of 3 voters, 2/3 of Americans, are unhappy with how things are going right now. Only 31%, roughly a third, say they're satisfied, the lowest in nearly 10 years. That poll was taken before Putin launched his war on Ukraine. Will Cain, co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend, we saw him moments ago with Bill Hemmer. Your top line thoughts on this?
So what I find fascinating, Harris, is what we want to make clean is actually so messy. In other words, you and I had a conversation about how ugly this could get inside Ukraine. In your conversation with Jennifer Griffin, she highlighted it does not matter how ugly it gets inside of Ukraine. NATO, aka the United States of America, will not be moved to action with a nuclear power in Russia. I think many Americans watching right now ask everything through the prism of what serves the American interest. How does this affect our lives? And I think that's an appropriate question to ask. Then we get to the messy part. What invokes an Article 5 NATO action? Clearly, if he invades the Baltics, clearly if he invaded Poland, that would provoke a in-kind response. But what about the messy parts? What about a cyber attack? What if you shut down an electrical grid that then bleeds over into Romania or into Poland? What if there's loss of life? What if a hospital is shut down in a NATO country? What about the messy parts of this? And I want to see leadership. I hope to see leadership from the President of the United States that helps the American people understand how we're going to avoid a nuclear war.
Well, moments ago, I asked Senator Cotton what happened to our swagger at NATO. And I'm starting to understand